When I was sure enough time had passed to take any suspicion off myself, using some latex gloves and a lockpick fashioned out of a paperclip, I snuck into that bitch's house in the dead of night. The house was old and empty, and as I prowled around her cozy homestead's hallways, random floorboards would creak and moan. It was so dark, but I was confident and careful. After hearing an intruder ascend the staircase, she came out into the hallway, threatening to call the police if whoever it was did not leave immediately. No way in hell. I bolted toward the sound of her voice, bat in hand, and cracked her a good one right in the skull. I can still hear the thud her body made as she crashed cold onto the floor. She awoke to me pouring a bucket of cold water on her in her basement. I had gagged her with a pair of her own socks and used the rope to tie her to the folding chair. She began panicking, surely wondering what was going on, who would do this to her, what did they want, and was this going to be the end? Her mind must have been racing a mile a minute, trying to figure out exactly who it was she wronged so badly that they would do something so horrible to her. But, believe me, as long as I let her sit there in the dark, terrified and confused, contemplating and wondering, I never once came into her mind. I could tell when I finally turned on the light to reveal myself to her, by the look in her eyes, the look of shock, and then regret. And then disgust. Disgust! Even as my captive, she still looked at me like a piece of vermin, a cockroach that needed to be squished. She never once imagined that I, a piece of store register machinery rather than human, would ever be capable of finding her and punishing her. "Hello, bitch," I sneered. "Do you remember me? Do you recognize me?" "Sure you do." She began wiggling in the chair, trying to break free, desperate to get the sock out of her mouth so she could doubtlessly spew more filth from that facial shithole. "I've come here tonight pretty much at your own invitation," I said. "You see, you've come into my store on a weekly basis for years and treated me, my coworkers, and our other customers as if we owe you something, as if you're God's gift to the goddamn world. As you know, I processed many money transfers to your daughter in Florida over the last few years, and you foolishly handed over the necessary information that I need to make your life absolutely miserable while you were doing it. You gave me your driver's license with your address on it, which led me right to you. Don't you think it's sad that I showed up here knowing that you're such a bitch that I would not have any trouble having to find a husband or a boyfriend? You're just a miserable hag who preys on the kind and polite because you know we cannot say anything back or else we'll get in trouble with our managers. All we do is try to help you and do our jobs, but you just have to find something to bitch about." Honestly, at this point, it was as if I was speaking to a deaf woman. Clearly, the severity of the situation was not sinking in, so I decided to just get to the point. Why draw it out any longer than I needed to? "Do you love your daughter?" I asked, scratching my head in a tone that revealed I was completely in control of the situation. Her eyes shot open wide as if to ask, "What do you care?" "Well," I explained, reaching into my pocket, "more than likely you do. I cannot even begin to fathom how you managed to trick some poor man into fucking you. I can only hope it was through the use of some form of date rape drug and that the poor man never had to face the sight of his own dick disappearing into your decrepit cunt." "But your daughter? She's probably the only person in this world you ever treated like an actual human being, isn't she? Someone you used to read bedtime stories to, and sing lullabies to, and take shopping during Girls' Day Out as you paraded through town, treating store clerk after store clerk like me more and more like shit as the day went on." At last, I saw a tiny bit of reflection in her eyes as she began reliving tiny moments of her past with her daughter in this highly tense, unpredictable situation she was stuck in. "I imagine your daughter is nowhere near as rude to others as you are," I said. "She's probably beautiful, and married, with kids of her own. Maybe that's why you're so bitter." I carefully pulled the sharp razor wire out of my pocket and slowly approached her, letting it rest, dangling round her neck past her shoulders. She squirmed and began to panic even more, desperately trying to wriggle free, to no avail. It's a shame you could have realized that people like me, we're not going to take people like yours shit anymore. If you had, perhaps you might have saved your poor daughter's life. From deep behind the socks I jammed in her mouth, I heard the enraged, confused screech that was most certainly the word, "What?" "You heard me right, bitch. Your daughter is dead. So are her kids. So is her husband. And it's all your fault. You led me right to them." Wait, oh yeah, I never mentioned this part, did I? So in order to transfer money to someone at our service desk, we need not only the state that it's going to, but also the city in which the recipient is going to be picking it up. During my bereavement time off work, I took a quick flight down to Florida to clear my head, as I told my family. I took an even quicker drive to the town in which the bitch had sent money, and using a good old-fashioned phone book, managed to find the exact address of the daughter's house. "I don't know if your parents are still alive," I said, "but I'm going to assume that they croaked many years ago, considering how old and miserable you are, although I want you to know, if I had any information on them, they'd be my next targets for ever bringing a miserable creature like you into the world. Oh, and if you don't believe me about your daughter, here's a picture to prove it." I reached in my pocket and pulled out a small 6x4 piece of photo paper. It was a picture of her daughter, her husband, and their kids, all with slashed throats, sitting on their living room couch with big red smiles painted with blood on each of their faces. Her eyes widened so far I thought they might pop out. At last, the moment I had been waiting for, she started crying. She stopped wriggling in her restraints and finally had just given up, bawling a river of tears down her cheeks. I had never seen her so powerless. Usually at the store she had a look of pure smug and superiority. Now I had reduced her to a sobbing puddle of tied-up skin and bones. It was wonderful. I had never felt so alive, but I kept my cool and did to her exactly what she did to me. I furiously stomped my foot as hard as I could and shouted, excuse me? I'm still waiting here. What the hell's your problem? I got a lot to do tonight." It was over. I had completely broken her. She had learned her lesson, and I finally knew that I had proven my point. I removed the socks from her mouth and gave her a chance to speak. "If you have anything to say to me, now's the time to say it," I warned. She was crying so much she could barely breathe. With each sob she let out, I felt more and more relief, more sure that what I had done had worked. Sure, it was a shame that it had to come to this, but she brought it to this. "You're a monster!" she cried, humiliated and defeated. I laughed hysterically. "Well, then what does that make you, bitch?" I asked. Before she could shed out one more word, I grabbed the ends of the razor wire, wrapped it around her neck, and pulled them in opposite directions, severing her head from her shoulders. I then untied her, took the rope, the chair, the razor wire, the bat, the bucket, and left her house before the sun came up. Over the next few days, reports of the decapitated woman and her daughter's slaughtered family dominated the news. Nobody could figure out a motive or reason why anyone would ever do this to an elderly woman and her beloved family. There were no prints found at the scene, no murder weapon found, and no incriminating evidence whatsoever was recovered. As for me, well, here's something for you to think about. I'm still out there somewhere. Like I said, I'm not a bad person. If I was, why be even telling you all this? I want you all to hear this and let it serve as a warning. Be careful how you treat others, no matter who they are, no matter where you meet them. You never know who you might push over the edge, and you never know what it might cost you.